I was 32 years old when I finally learned that the quietest betrayals cut the deepest. My name is Christina Burnett, and on the night everything fell apart, I wasn't expecting an emotional earthquake. I was just smoothing the front of a navy cocktail dress and helping my boyfriend Lucas decide between two tie clips. The evening air was warm, humming with the sense of importance he'd carried all week. The annual post-merger gala was the kind of event he treated like a personal Olympics, and he'd been talking about it nonstop for days. The apartment glowed with soft lamplight, and I moved through it with the comfortable rhythm of someone who believed she belonged there. I'd picked up a bottle of his favorite champagne after work and tucked it carefully into the fridge for later. A small celebration, I'd thought. A moment to pause and breathe together after navigating the chaos of his corporate world. From the bathroom, I could hear him humming sharply between the metallic clicks of cologne bottles. "This is going to be the biggest night of the quarter," he called out, his voice bright and vibrating with ambition. "The West Coast executives are flying in. You have no idea how many senior partners might be there." "I know," I said gently, fastening my earring while watching my reflection in the bedroom mirror. "You've worked so hard for this. They'd be blind not to notice." He stepped out of the bathroom, adjusting his cufflinks with brisk, purposeful motions. He looked sharp, powerful, like a man whose entire identity was wrapped in the polished shine of his suits and the razor edge of his hair part. I felt a flicker of warmth, then pride for him, for us, for everything we'd built together these last 5 years. "I restored that big bookshelf for the Henderson project today," I said, soft laughter in my voice as I leaned against the doorframe. Old man Henderson even complimented my hand-carved joints, said it was a forgotten art. "That's nice," Lucas said. He didn't look at me. He was adjusting his tie, tilting his chin, assessing himself in the mirror, with the intensity of someone prepping for a press conference rather than a social gathering. His tone wasn't unkind, just distracted. It wasn't unusual, but something in the air shifted. A quiet, dense weight settled over the room like dust gathering in slow motion. I pushed off the doorframe and took a step toward him. "If you're ready, I'll grab my wrap and then Christina." The soft warning in his voice made me pause. He gripped the edge of the vanity, his shoulders tightening. His reflection stared back at me with something I couldn't immediately read. Something smaller than annoyance, but sharper than nerves. "Can we talk for a second?" he asked. I blinked, surprised by the sudden seriousness. "Of course. What's wrong?" He took a breath, the kind someone gives themselves before pitching an idea they already know won't land well. "This is awkward, but I need to say it before we leave." He turned then, finally looking at me. His eyes were clear but cold, like glass left in a freezer. "It might be better if you didn't come tonight." The words drifted into the air between us, so soft and casual that for a second I thought he was joking. I let out a startled, nervous laugh. "What?" "Lucas, what are you talking about?" "We've been planning this for weeks. I want to meet your team. You said—" "It's important," he cut in quickly, gesturing vaguely, his voice tightening. "Really important. There will be VPs, partners, investors, people who shape careers. It's all about perception." My heartbeat thudded harder. Perception of what? He hesitated just long enough for dread to settle fully into my stomach. "Of me," he said finally, "of how I fit into that world, and of who I bring with me." The room felt like it tilted. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do," he said, eyes narrowing with a softness that somehow made it worse. He looked at me, then, not lovingly, not kindly, but clinically, as if assessing whether I'd survive the incision he was about to make. "Christina, your whole vibe, it doesn't fit. The quiet, small-town woodworker thing, the comfortable shoes, the way you talk about your projects. He swallowed. "It's embarrassing." The word hit me with the force of a stone thrown directly into my chest. Embarrassing. It rang in my ears, loud and unreal, bouncing off the walls of the room where we'd painted. The trim together and laughed until we couldn't breathe. Embarrassing. The life we shared, the woman he'd chosen, the love I'd given, he was embarrassed by all of it. He didn't stop. "You don't speak the same language as the people I'll be with tonight. The world I'm trying to break into is nothing like yours. I mean, come on, Christina, your job is quaint, charming. But tonight is not about quaint or charming." He exhaled sharply, frustrated now. "You'd hold me back. Something inside me, something warm and tender, and built through years of devotion, simply shut off. I felt it click in my chest like a breaker flipping, the shock drained from my limbs, replaced by a slow, cold clarity. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't ask him to reconsider. I just stopped loving him. The silence stretched long and brittle. He watched me as though expecting a meltdown, a plea, a fight, something he could manage. But all I did was nod once steady and hollow. Okay. He blinked, thrown off balance. Okay. So you understand. Yes, I said quietly. Perfectly. He seemed relieved, actually. Relieved, smiling a small, tight smile before grabbing his sleek black clutch wallet and straightening his jacket. We'll talk later. Don't wait up. He left the room with the soft clack of his expensive shoes, then the front door clicked shut with surgical finality. That was the moment the shock melted into motion. I moved through our shared life with ghost-like precision, opening drawers, gathering only the things that were truly mine, leaving behind every item he'd ever chosen for me. The designer dresses he insisted would elevate my image. The perfume he said smelled more sophisticated. The jewelry he claimed suited me better than my simple silver pieces. Costumes for a play I no longer wanted to be in. The duffel bag held everything essential. My father's old woodworking multi-tool, my passport, the sweaters Lucas always mocked, my real life. On the kitchen counter, next to the untouched champagne, I placed a single sheet of paper. 2 sentences. No emotion. No explanation. Problem solved. Now you'll never be seen with me again. I walked out of the apartment and didn't look back. By midnight, I was sitting on the edge of a motel bed, the hum of the air conditioning filling the silence. My phone lit up. Lucas. Then again, and again. 50 voicemails later, the world was quiet except for the pulse of my own breathing. He had been ashamed of me, but I was finally free. The first night alone in the motel didn't break me. It bruised me in places I couldn't yet name, but it didn't break me. I'd always believed heartbreak would feel like fire, loud, consuming, dramatic. Instead, it was cold, quiet, a hollowing more than a burning. The kind of emptiness that made the hum of the motel air conditioning feel like company. My duffel bag rested near my feet like a refugee suitcase, the zipper still half open. I hadn't bothered unpacking. I just wanted to sit, breathe, and understand the vastness of what had just happened. I hadn't even cried. Not really. I'd expected tears, but instead there was only a strange clarity, like the world had stopped spinning long enough for me to finally see where I stood. My phone buzzed again. His name, Lucas, lit up the screen bright against the dim yellow glow of the motel room. I didn't answer. I didn't even touch the phone. The call went to voicemail. Then another came. Then another. He was spiraling, and part of me felt an eerie detachment as I watched it. It wasn't until the 5th voicemail that curiosity, not hope, made me tap play. His voice came through shaky and confused. Christina, what is this? Where are you? Are you kidding? You left over what we need to talk. Come home. I deleted it. The next messages escalated anger edging into his tone, disbelief twisting into guilt-tripping accusations. You're being dramatic. You're proving my point. We're adults. You can't just run away when things get hard. But I hadn't run away because things were hard. I'd left because he made it clear I didn't belong in his world. That clarity was my lifeline. The voicemails continued into the early morning, forming a digital pile of his unraveling. I didn't listen to all of them. Not then. Not yet. I turned off the lamp and let the motel darkness settle around me like a blanket. For the first time in 5 years, the silence belonged to me, and only me. By the next afternoon, I was gone. The motel was a bandage, not a home. I drove until the city felt like a memory behind me, passing rows of old brick buildings and fading billboards until I reached the outskirts where life slowed down enough to breathe again. The studio apartment above a garage wasn't elegant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The landlord, a kind older man named Ellis, didn't care about my situation as long as the rent was paid on time. He showed me the space with the casual familiarity of someone who had no interest in my baggage, emotional or otherwise. The studio smelled faintly of motor oil from the garage below and old cedar from the built-in shelves. The walls were plain, the floors scuffed, but in the corner near the window there was enough room for a workbench, enough room for me. The first day was survival. The second was structure. I unpacked only what mattered. My chisels, my small set of planes, my carving knives, the multi-tool my father once carried in his pocket for years. I placed everything neatly on the workbench as the late afternoon light poured in. Wood shavings and silence, those had always been my cure. Slowly, the noise in my head settled. I spent the next week repairing my client list. For months, I'd stepped back from my woodworking commissions, dimming myself to match the polished world Lucas thrived in. Now, reclaiming my work, felt like reclaiming oxygen. Old clients were surprised to hear from me, but most were delighted, enthusiastic even. And just as I'd hoped, the Henderson job came through. The library restoration, the one I'd spoken about the night Lucas dismissed my joy, was mine. Old man Henderson had recommended me, just as I'd known he would. He saw value where Lucas saw quaintness. And the contrast between those two reactions became another quiet reminder of why leaving had been the only real choice left. Every day I drove to the library, the air filled with the scent of dust and old paper. The floors creaked softly beneath my boots as I worked sanding, filing, restoring, bringing life back into the wood. The physical labor healed me in ways I didn't realize I needed. With every plank I smoothed, with every joint I repaired, I felt myself settling back into a version of me that had been buried under Lucas's expectations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, steady, sane. At night, I'd return to the studio apartment, sit on the floor with takeout containers, and let the quietness wrap around me again. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a reset. But the voicemails kept coming. Not every day. Sometimes he'd stop for 2 days at a time as though he'd convinced himself that silence would punish me. But the messages always returned, each one revealing yet another stage of emotional bargaining. The angriest ones I deleted without listening. The pathetic ones I let play while I folded clothes or sharpened chisels. Eventually, curiosity won again, and I found myself scrolling through them. Late one night, freshly showered hair, still damp, sitting cross-legged on the bed. There were 53 voicemails. Some were rambling, some were cold, some were disintegrating. The shift was slow but unmistakable. His initial frustration cracked, letting something softer and more dangerous bleed through. "Christina, please, this is ridiculous. Come home, we're good together. We can talk about it." Then, "I don't know why you're doing this. It's humiliating. I told my mother you're visiting family. She thinks you're coming back." Then, "The gala wasn't fun. Not without you. People kept asking where you were. I didn't know what to say. Can't we just go back to how we were?" And then, one voicemail that made me pause. Not because it hurt me, because it didn't. His voice trembled thin and cracked. "I miss you, Christina. I can't sleep. The apartment is too quiet. I didn't mean it. I was stressed. You're the only thing that ever grounded me. Please, just call me back." I listened to the whole message sitting there on the edge of the bed with my phone glowing against the dark. At one point, I would have cried hearing him sound like that lost small human. But I'd already done my grieving in silence. All I felt now was distance. A wide, calm ocean standing between us. I selected all 53 voicemails. I pressed delete. And then with a steady, intentional movement, I blocked his number. There was no triumph in the motion. No bitterness. Just relief. The silence that followed wasn't hollow anymore. It felt full, present, like a companion settling into the room beside me. It was the first night in years I fell asleep peacefully without waiting for someone else's approval to exhale. 6 months is not long in the grand scheme of a lifetime, but it's enough to regrow a soul. By the time winter thawed into early spring, my studio apartment above the garage felt nothing like the place I had stumbled into with a duffel bag and a hollow heart. The scent of cedar and varnish filled the air, now clinging to my clothes and my hair in a way I found comforting. My workbench, once just a lonely slab of wood in the corner, now carried projects in all stages of progress: carved cabinet doors, half-finished picture frames, delicate inlay designs, drying under soft light. Life didn't feel like it was waiting anymore. It felt like it was happening. Every morning, sunlight pooled across the floorboards in warm gold patches, waking me gently instead of jolting me like Lucas's alarm once had. I drank my coffee without rushing. I listened to the quiet creak of the garage below as Ellis tinkered with old engines. The world no longer spun on Lucas's schedule or his ambitions. It spun on mine. The library restoration had finally wrapped up, and with its completion came something I hadn't expected recognition. The local paper did a short feature on the renovation, briefly mentioning the craftsmanship behind the restored wooden shelves, and suddenly my inbox was filled with inquiries. A couple wanted a custom headboard. A restaurant owner needed a new counter. A boutique hotel asked if I could restore their antique doors. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not tolerated, not critiqued. Seen. It was on the final week of the library project that I met Ethan. He was standing in the art history section, sketchbook in hand, his dark hair falling slightly over his forehead as he studied the newly installed shelves. His expression was curious, appreciative, not of the books, but of the grain, the exposed joinery, the craftsmanship. I paused a few feet away, wiping dust from my palms onto my jeans. "You're the woodworker?" he asked, without turning his voice warm and a little amused, like he already knew the answer. I raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" He finally looked at me, and there was something soft but sharp in his gaze, the kind of attention that didn't devour but absorbed. Only someone who made these would look at them the way you just did. I felt a quiet laugh escape me. "Well, yes, I'm Christina." "Ethan," he said, offering his hand. His handshake was steady and warm, not too firm, not performative. Graphic designer, typography nerd, and professional admirer of good craftsmanship. Is that a paying profession? Emotionally, extremely. Financially, not even a little. The conversation slipped into place like two dovetailed joints, smooth, natural, unexpectedly perfect. We talked about the carving patterns, about the types of tools I used, about the old varnish I'd removed from the panels. Somehow that turned into a 2-hour discussion about design art old buildings and the slow beauty of handmade work. He didn't treat my craft like a hobby or a quaint little talent the way Lucas did. He treated it like an art form. When he asked if I wanted to grab coffee at the little cafe down the street, I didn't feel nervous or uncertain. I felt curious. The cafe was cozy with warm wooden beams overhead and soft indie music playing in the background. We sat in the corner near the window, the late afternoon sun casting amber light across the table. Ethan ordered an iced Americano. I stuck with a latte. Our conversation once again didn't strain. It flowed. He told me about designing book covers and his fascination with old printmaking techniques. I told him about the first birdhouse I ever carved in middle school and how it accidentally attracted squirrels instead of birds. He laughed a real laugh from the chest, and something unknotted in me, warm and effortless. With Lucas, laughter had often felt filtered through self-awareness. With Ethan, it felt like breathing. We met again the next afternoon, and the next. Some days we talked for hours. Other days we barely spoke, sitting in comfortable silence while he sketched, and I scribbled measurements or drew designs on scrap paper. He never made me feel like I had to shrink. He never made me feel like I had to grow into someone else's world. He simply met me where I was. It was a Thursday when everything shifted. We were sitting in our usual corner at the cafe, my hands cupped around a steaming mug while Ethan flipped through his sketchbook. I was teasing him about his obsession with serif fonts when the bell on the cafe door chimed sharply. I didn't look up immediately, but I felt it like a cold wind brushing the back of my neck. A presence, a shift in the air that didn't belong to the warm, fragrant calm of the cafe. Ethan glanced toward the entrance first. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Christina, someone's looking at you." I turned, and the world seemed to contract to a single point. It was Lucas, but not the Lucas I'd known, not the polished, sleek, always perfect version. He looked smaller, diminished, wearing a rumpled sweater instead of tailored suits. His hair, once styled meticulously, was pushed back carelessly. His eyes, sharp and cold the night he'd dismissed me, were now dark and tired, ringed with shadows he couldn't hide. He approached slowly, hesitantly, like a man navigating the ruins of a life he once thought indestructible. "Christina." My name left his lips like a fragile confession. I didn't stand. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. I simply looked at him with the same calm I'd learned to cultivate in the studio apartment, the calm of someone who no longer owes the past anything. "Lucas." Beside me, Ethan placed his pen down, sensing the shift without inserting himself. His presence felt steady grounding, like the warm grain of wood beneath my hands at the workshop. Lucas swallowed hard, eyes glancing from me to Ethan and back again. Vulnerability flickered across his face, raw, unfamiliar. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Please." I didn't move. "We can talk," I said here. His expression faltered. That wasn't the script he had prepared, but it was the only one I would allow. For the first time since the night he'd told me I embarrassed him, I watched Lucas genuinely tremble, caught between regret and the realization that I was not his to command anymore. And I knew unmistakably that this story was no longer about his world. It was about mine. Lucas stood there in the soft cafe, lighting utterly out of place in the warm wooden world Ethan and I had built between us. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and espresso, gentle and grounding so violently at odds with the storm brewing in Lucas's eyes. He hovered beside the table, fingers twitching, breath uneven, as if waiting for me to grant him a private stage. But I had no interest in staging anything for him ever again. Ethan sat quietly beside me, his presence steady, unobtrusive. He wasn't threatened. He wasn't curious in a territorial way. He simply sensed that this moment belonged to me, and that the best thing he could do was remain still, a quiet anchor. "Please," Lucas whispered again, swallowing hard. "Just a minute. Alone." I leaned back slightly in my chair, the ceramic mug warm against my palms. "If you have something to say, you can say it here." A flicker of panic crossed his face. His eyes darted around, scanning the cafe as if expecting attentive ears. But no one was watching. No one cared. This wasn't his world anymore, and he no longer commanded an audience. He wet his lips, exhaled shakily, and began. "I made a mistake." The words rushed out in a single breath, packed with desperation and something that sounded suspiciously like rehearsed remorse. A huge one. The night of the gala. Everything was going wrong. I was stressed. You know how I get. I said things I didn't mean. Things I regret every day. I stayed silent. Silence was his punishment, though I didn't wield it with cruelty. It simply existed, truthful, unbending, unashamed. Lucas fidgeted with the cuffs of his sweater. A sweater, not a suit jacket. That detail alone felt like a symbol of everything he'd lost in his chase for perfection. "Work's been—" He paused, searching for the softest word. "A disaster." They passed me over for the promotion. Again. And I realized, God, Christina, I realized too late how badly I screwed up. The people I was so desperate to impress. He gave a hollow laugh. "They're selfish, cold. They don't care about loyalty. They don't care who you are unless you're useful." He scrubbed a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "Everyone I thought was a friend. Gone. They invited me out when I had status, when I had momentum. But once I didn't, once I slipped, nobody even texted." His gaze finally lifted to mine, raw and pleading. "You were the one person who stayed. You believed in me. You grounded me. I didn't see it until you left." A single tear slid down his cheek, not theatrical, but genuine in its pathetic honesty. "I thought I needed a certain kind of life, a certain kind of image, but it all feels fake now, empty. Christina, I need you. I want to try again. I want us back. Please." The cafe hummed softly around us, the hiss of the milk steamer, the clink of a spoon against a ceramic cup, the rustle of jackets as customers came and went. Life didn't pause for his confession. I took a breath and let it release slowly. Not for dramatic effect, for calm, for clarity. I felt Ethan's steady presence beside me, supportive, respectful, quietly protective. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Lucas, however, interpreted the silence as permission to continue. "Christina," he said urgently, taking a half step forward. "I'm sorry. I miss you. I miss us. I miss the way you made everything feel real. You made me better. I didn't see it then, but I do now. I swear I do." Another tear, another trembling breath. "I was scared," he said. "Scared of failing. Scared of looking small. And instead of facing that, I took it out on you. I was cruel. I know that. But people make mistakes when they're scared. You taught me that I can be myself without needing the world's approval. Please, don't throw away 5 years." I leaned slightly forward enough for him to believe I was finally ready to speak. His shoulders sagged with relief. But relief was not what I was offering. "I believe you," I said softly. Hope flashed across his face, bright, blinding, almost childlike. I continued, my voice even. "I believe you think you made a mistake." The hope froze, then shattered. But for me, I said it wasn't a mistake. It was clarity. Lucas blinked rapidly, confusion slipping into dread. "Christina, when you told me I embarrassed you, it wasn't stress." My voice stayed calm, steady, as the grain of walnut under finish. It was honesty. Brutal, unfiltered honesty. I didn't fit your world, Lucas, and you didn't fit mine. The only difference between us is that I accepted it. He shook his head desperately. "No, I didn't mean." "You did," I cut in gently. "And maybe you still do. But even if you didn't, I'm not going back to pretending. I'm not shrinking myself so someone else can feel bigger." Lucas's breath faltered. "You weren't wrong to say we come from different worlds," I said. "You were wrong to believe yours was the better one." Ethan shifted slightly beside me, not as a challenge to Lucas, but as a quiet reminder of the contrast of what respect looked like. I lifted my hand slightly, gesturing toward Ethan with open acknowledgement. This is my life now. Simple, honest, built with my hands and my heart, not on someone else's approval. Lucas's gaze flickered to Ethan, and I watched the realization hit him like a slow-moving collapse. He wasn't just losing me. He had already lost me. We're done, I said gently. Not harsh, not cruel, just final. Lucas stood there for a long moment, breathing unevenly, tears still clinging to his lashes. His hands hung at his sides, limp with shock. His face contorted not with anger, but with the heavy sinking weight of defeat. He looked at me, then at Ethan, then at the floor. And without another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe, slowly, quietly, like a ghost dissolving into daylight. The bell on the cafe door chimed behind him. The sound was soft, almost tender. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the life he walked out of was no longer mine. It hadn't been for a long time. Ethan placed his hand near mine, not touching, just close enough for warmth to bridge the distance. When I finally looked at him, his expression was filled not with victory, but with respect. So, he said gently, you were teasing me about serif fonts. A soft laugh escaped me unforced whole. Yes, I said, and I'm not finished. We slipped seamlessly back into conversation, not as a performance, not as a show of strength, but because Lucas was no longer the center of my story. I was. Spring settled into the kind of gentle warmth that softened the edges of everything it touched. Through the open window of my studio apartment, the breeze carried hints of freshly cut grass and the faint scent of sawdust that clung to my workbench. Morning light spilled across the half-finished jewelry box I'd been carving a commission for a client who wanted something delicate but strong. I smiled at that. The description felt familiar. My fingers glided along the smooth curve of the lid, tracing the vine patterns that climbed upward in quiet curls. 6 months ago, the sound of a chisel against wood had been survival. Now it was music, a heartbeat, a reminder that life rebuilt with your own hands is stronger than anything someone else could ever design for you. My phone buzzed on the counter, not frantically, not insistently, just a single soft notification, a text from Ethan. Breakfast later, I'm working on that cover I told you about. Could use your eyes. I didn't reply immediately. Not because I didn't want to, but because for the first time in years, every decision I made came from a place that was mine, fully mine. When I did pick up the phone, my response was simple. Absolutely. And I want to show you something too. I set the phone aside and returned to the jewelry box, a piece I had once dreamt of making for Lucas long before he'd reduced my work to a quaint little hobby. I'd abandoned that original box the night I left him, leaving it half-carved on the workbench of a life that no longer fit. This one was different, not built for someone who expected perfection, not carved to prove worth. This box was the embodiment of choice, my choice. Outside Ellis, from the garage below, revved an engine tinkering like he always did. The familiar vibration buzzed through the floorboards, grounding me. I took a steady breath, letting the sounds of the day weave together, the metallic clink of tools, the hum of passing cars, the rustle of wind through the thin trees lining the street. This was my world now, imperfect, honest, real. I wiped wood dust from my hands and took a step back from the bench. In the quiet, I reflected on how far I had come. Not in a triumphant, cinematic way, but in the soft, steady rhythm of someone who had finally shed the skin that no longer belonged to them. Lucas had been a weight I didn't know I was carrying until I put him down. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness had dissolved with time, replaced by a distant understanding. People like him didn't destroy you with chaos or cruelty. They destroyed you with small, accumulating dismissals until your self-worth bent under the pressure of their expectations. But silence had saved me. Leaving had saved me. I picked up a small paintbrush and began applying a thin coat of varnish to the box. Each stroke was slow and deliberate, meditative. The wood gleamed softly under the touch, the pattern becoming more vivid with each pass. Lucas's presence in my life had once been loud, sharp, consuming. Now he was a faint echo buried under layers of peace I had rebuilt grain by grain. As I worked, the memory of him in the cafe flickered for a moment. Not painfully, not triumphantly, just truthfully. The weakened shoulders, the cracked voice, the way he'd looked at me as if expecting the past to rewind itself. But the past wasn't a loop. It was a door, and I had already walked through it. Most people assume closure happens in a single moment, a dramatic confrontation, a slammed door, a final declaration. But closure had come to me slowly in small pieces, in the quiet mornings, shaping wood in the shared laughter with Ethan, in the relief of not needing forgiveness to feel whole again. When Lucas said he missed me, he hadn't missed me. He missed the version of himself that was easier to maintain when someone else carried the emotional load. He missed the audience. He missed the convenience. He missed the comfort of knowing someone would stay even when he didn't see their worth. But I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's storyline. As the varnish dried, the jewelry box shimmered with a warm sheen. It was beautiful not because it was flawless, but because it held imperfections that told the truth of its making. Slight variations in the carved vine, a tiny groove where my hand had once trembled. Marks of authenticity, not shame. This was the lesson I had fought to learn. Your worth isn't measured by someone else's world. Your life doesn't need to fit into someone else's script. And love, real love, doesn't ask you to shrink. A knock sounded lightly against the stairwell door. Ethan, probably holding 2 coffees and wearing that crooked, easy smile that made space in my chest I didn't realize I had been closing off for years. Before going down, I glanced once more around the studio. The tools, the sunlight, the open window, the life I had carved back into existence. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't small. I wasn't someone's afterthought or liability. I was Christina Burnett, and for the first time in my adult life, I belonged entirely to myself. I set the jewelry box gently on the windowsill, letting the sunlight catch the varnish,